Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Global Awareness Lecture. This program has been, my name is Gary Prevost. I'm the director of the Global Awareness Lecture Series, and we've worked with the Center for Global Education and the Institute for Women's Leadership to bring this program to our campus. This is the second of our programs for this semester. We will have two more programs in April. Arnold August, a researcher from Canada, will be presenting on Democracy in Motion, Cuba and its Neighbors. That's coming up on April 14th. And before that, on April the 1st, Mary Kramer, an immigration lawyer from Miami, St. Ben's grad, will be presenting on Colombia. So please watch your email notices for those two events, and we hope you can join us for those. I'm now going to ask my colleague, Manju Parikh from the Political Science Department, to come up and introduce tonight's speaker. Manju.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Fouzia Saeed, who is a dear friend and a person I admire greatly. Dr. Saeed is actually very familiar with Minnesota because she studied in Twin Cities. She got her PhD from University of Minnesota. If I may say, maybe Minnesota is her second home, you know. She loves coming back, so. After obtaining her education, she returned to Pakistan, where she has lived and worked for many, many years. Last year, she was invited to be a fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy. This year, she's connected with George Mason University as a research fellow. From what I've observed, Dr. Fouzia Saeed wears many hats. She's an activist who has promoted many causes such as rights of minorities, freedom of religion and expression, rights of women, and peaceful relations between Pakistan and her neighbors. Dr. Saeed is also a scholar who has published many articles and important books. Tomorrow, we're going to have a book discussion on one of her recent books titled Working with Sharks, a Pakistani woman's story of countering sexual harassment in United Nations. This is the book. It is an amazing story of courage and leadership. I encourage everyone here to read her book. She's also a community organizer. She's the director of Mehergar, which is an organization that facilitates dialogue among different communities and build consensus and understanding. They do retreat for young people to train them to become leaders in their community and promote peaceful relations. Tonight, she will talk about how women in Pakistan are taking leadership in the struggle for civil rights and democracy. We are indeed very fortunate to have Dr. Saeed with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Saeed.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very happy to be here. Midwest is my home. Minnesota is my home, really. I call it my village, though. My village in Pakistan, everybody has a village. When they introduce themselves, they say, yeah, I live in Islamabad, but my village is this. So I live in DC right now, and I say my village is Minnesota. No, no comment about being rural or not, but that's where my hometown is. So it's nice to be in a university environment also. It sort of makes me feel a bit younger. And very happy to have this chance to engage with you. So I thought that you have a good international orientation in your education, and you have several areas of study where you go out of United States and study other countries. So this would be a good, I think my talk would fit right in there, because I will talk a little bit about Pakistan and the stories and people's struggle, especially women's struggles. Yeah, so I will start by introducing Pakistan's geography a little bit. And I know many of you would know a lot more, some probably not so much. So it's good to talk about the basics first. Pakistan is a very, I say it's a hot seat. And I openly give an option to anybody if they want to trade the geographical location with us. They're most welcome to do so. We are sandwiched in very volatile countries, being one ourselves. But China and Russia, Afghanistan, Iran, India, we are kind of sandwiched in between. So it's very volatile in many ways. Okay, let me. Some facts very quickly. These are more facts and also a little bit of undoing the misconceptions. We are very South Asians. A lot of people think that we are Arabs, but we are not Arabs. And we have little to do with, other than sharing a religion, we have little to do with culturally, with Middle East. We are very South Asian. So our culture is very similar to Bangladesh, India, somewhat to Afghanistan also. But the second is that we got independence from a colonial rule in 1947. A lot of people say Pakistan was born in 1947 and the country is 65 years some old. And I always try to say that no, we could have named our country, we could have gone into East India and West India. And then people would have thought that we were very old. But just because we have a new name does not mean that we are new people. We are very old civilization. We have a parliamentary form of government, which is also different from United States, which is a presidential form, and the dynamics are very different. And the last point I just threw in now, it's more. It has reached actually 50,000. But a lot of people think that we are the hub of terrorism and there are a lot of terrorists there. Yes, that is true, but I also wanted to just highlight the fact that 50,000 people so far have died. So we are a victim of terrorism also, not just nurturers of terrorism. Now this is just to give another level of introduction. We have different provinces like your states, not as many though, but we have 5. And different provinces now have more autonomy, but we are a federation. The point I wanted to make was we are a federation, and that is something we share with the United States. The difference is that our provinces are more geographical concentration of ethnic groups also. So whereas here you all speak English, we have different languages in different provinces, and people even sometimes look a little different ethnically than the other provinces. Now, this is the ethnic divide, and I just wanted to show you how it matches the boundary of the provinces. It's pretty much concentrated within the boundaries. So it's almost like having 5 countries in a country with different languages and different songs and different cultures in each province. And now I want to spread the ethnicity a little bit across the borders in the neighboring countries to show you that we have a diversity of ethnicities within the country, but then it matches with ethnicity across the border. So this slide is also important to understand when people talk about terrorism and Afghanistan and Pakistan as if they're 2 countries. But if you look at the green part, these are all Pashto speakers. So the whole southern Afghanistan and the whole province of KP, we call it in brief, of Pakistan are the same people, same families, relatives, same language. And we have a very tall a range of mountains, so they walk across very freely. And at dinner I was saying we don't even have a painted line where it says this is the boundary of Pakistan across those mountains. So people really travel very freely. And similarly, the pink in Balochistan, we share the ethnicity. And a lot of people living around the border, they would go across the border to buy soap rather than coming to a town to buy soap. So that we share with the people around us. We have had a mix of military rule and democratic rule, about half and half. After independence, we have about 65 years, and I would say 32 to be precise, roughly, military rule. But we have had waves of military rule. So it has been like 10 years of military rule, then people are successful to overcome that, and get democratic government established, then it is not very strong when the military strikes again, etc. So we have gone, right now this is the second term of elected government. So for about 7 years we have had democratic rule. This is to show diversity in Pakistan, because I feel like a lot of people who have not visited Pakistan and have learned about Pakistan through media, through people it's much nicer, but through media then you tend to think that all women look alike and all men look alike. Actually, a lot of people think that the whole country has big beards, but that is not true. And I always clarify that women cannot grow beards and we are 50% in any case. But among women also, we have fighter pilots. These days, that's a very cool thing. Women want to go into flying planes. Sorry about some of these changes that might occur because of the system change between Apple and Word. But we have, this is like a rock star, very popular with following, crazy following. And we have all wrapped up women in hijab also. So and I also want to make a point that people who understand, who try to learn about other countries should look around within their countries, because we sometimes are among our friends and we think that the whole country is like that. And there are people here who would actually question evolution, and there are people who are very liberal, and all sorts of people in a country. And every country in the world always has their conservatives, and their liberals, and their activists, and their pro-establishment people, and their weirdos. You know, you have to have, every country has that range. Now, sometimes one category is larger than the other, but they have their range. So in a sense, when you learn about another country, Pakistan is also full of all kinds of people. So this was just to give you a glimpse of that. Now I want to come to women's issues. Women's issues, again, the perception of women's issues is that they are very repressed, and which is fine. You know, I have no qualms about perceptions, but to just relate to you that we women in South Asia, not just Pakistan, but in South Asia, we live in a patriarchal society. And it is a male-dominated society, and we have made our way into certain arenas, and we are struggling hard in others. In some I would say we are suppressed, and the establishment narrative sort of dominates. But it's a struggle that we go through, and our social issues range from, for women, our social issues range from honor killing, which is like death or murdering in the name of honor, to discrimination, harassment, things that, you know, many women can relate to. So we have a whole range of things. There are parts of the society which are very tribal. Those parts are very difficult to bring about a change in. But the urban, the information revolution, I would say, you know, with social media and all, that has helped a lot. Technological revolution has helped a lot. Urbanization has helped a lot. And again, in every society, if you look at the evolution and you look at the changes that have come in the lives of women, all these things play a role. You know, when women here, for example, when women got voting rights, the pill, it came as a huge turning point when women got more control over their bodies. So in similar sense of the process, we women are trying to struggle against patriarchy. A lot of people think that we are fighting against our religion, because a lot of times a woman's suppression is related to Islam. Now that is true that many people in Pakistan and elsewhere also use Islam as a smokescreen for suppressing women's rights. But our fight, I want to clarify that as a human rights activist, a Pakistani women's rights activist, that our struggle is not against Islam. Our struggle is against patriarchy, which is much older than Islam. Because patriarchy you see in all religions, you know, all the layers of religions. And we have, as people, we are very old people, not 65 years old. So we have had Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism and several layers of religions. And when we got the religion of Islam as a layer, there are a lot of colors that peek out of that. So it's never like a pure religious layer. And the patriarchal values peek through every religion that has come over. And we have to struggle against that. A lot of times here, I'm in DC right now, so sometimes I talk positively about my country, and people say, you are a pro-government person. And I always tell them that government means little, in a sense that we are fighting the patriarchal norms centuries old. It's not one government or the other. It's not about 5 years democratically elected government. This is like a huge genie that we are fighting against. I also want to share with you that we have a very organized women's movement. It used to be that it was more urban-based, city-based, and more educated women, but now it has spread into a broader base. And our villages also have pretty good, I would say, pretty well-organized civil society, if not women's movement, but civil society. So we make a lot of fuss about militancy-related issues, about social ills, about these murders that sometimes you hear about, lighter issues, heavier issues. Sometimes we have a very strong opinion about political issues. For example, militancy is something that hits us directly. The militants who use the name of religion and basically want to win over the country and a whole lot of countries, they always come very hard on women, and they use religion as a pretext. So we have a lot of qualms with militants. So we are always out in the streets. If they're burning schools, we're out in the streets protesting against them. If they do any other kind of dialogue with the country, we are out. Jihad is not terrorism, many things like that. So this was just to give you an overall context. Now I want to zoom into one story, because the generalized description doesn't really gives you a feel for the country. So I want to take one instance or one issue and take you with me to show you how we struggle against certain practices, patriarchal practices. This was one issue that I faced, I experienced, and Manju talked about my book, Working with Sharks. I finished my PhD here at University of Minnesota. I went back home, and this was like almost my first job with the United Nations. And it was a senior job. I was supposed to evolve and develop a program for women, so that was like a dream job for me, because I had been preparing myself to do a lot for Pakistani women, and I thought this was my opportunity to be associated with a platform which is considered neutral and do a lot of work for women. So the job part was okay, but the environment, the organizational environmental part was very difficult. And gradually, my work was hampered. I felt I got humiliated again and again, even though my work was giving me credibility, but there was an element of sexual harassment that was coming in the way very badly. And gradually, when it came to a point where I felt I could not work any longer because it was interfering with my work so much, I decided to file a case. So this was an international, United Nations, an international organization. My head boss used to be a British guy. My number 2 boss was a Japanese guy. And when I decided to complain, then I gradually found out that actually this particular guy against who I was complaining, we were in an organization of 100, we were 16 women. And I found out that he was actually treating every woman like that. And so we talked about it. It was also strange that we women didn't know about this, that he was treating everybody like that, because we didn't talk about it. And it is very interesting that women, especially like me, who are into these leadership roles and are confident and are fighting for women's issues, it is even more difficult for us to think of us as victims. So finally, we talked to other women, and it seemed like 11 of us, we got together and we said, okay, we will file a suit against this guy. So in United Nations, we cannot actually go to the country courts. You have to stay within the United Nations to file a suit. So this was a case that we filed, and it was, I'm not going into the story. I hope that some of you would take the book and read it. But it was a very torturous process because we thought that coming to this decision was the big deal. And everybody had concerns because we have stigmas attached to speaking out about such crimes. And we thought once we took a stand, then that is it. That was the main struggle. And we didn't realize that that was only the beginning of the struggle. Because one would think that a management would believe what 11 women are saying for one man, but nothing of the sort. Everybody said that they all were lying, and this guy was right. So 2 years of very torturous process that I went through that taught me a lot, made me half a lawyer, at least if not full lawyer. And I think that was a turning point for me because I realized that I was working on women's issues long before that too. But it was a very different kind of an insight going through the process. And I realized that this was such a common issue that we raise fuss about honor killings and domestic violence and those kinds of things. And this is such an invisible issue that you can't even touch. And it is touching every woman's life actually on a daily basis. And it is coming in the way of pursuit of education, working, every field. And then I thought, I was educated. I was more confident because of my economical situation and my job and my degrees and all that. And what are these factory women doing? What are these women doing in the fields where they have tribal people hovering over their heads? So when I came out of this, I started working on this and educating myself as to what sexual harassment is and realized that it is really the power of the issue lies within the myths around the issue. So because women do not speak out, because women feel like they will be blamed, and because people will say, no, I have been studying here too, but it has never happened to me. So, that inclination that something you were wearing or your own behavior is responsible, that burden is what really stops women to speak out. And unless we unravel those myths, demystify the issue, we can never touch it. So we started working on those areas, and we also formed an alliance called ASHA. ASHA actually means hope, but it stands for an alliance against sexual harassment. And we got together some like-minded organizations, and we said, listen, we have been speaking about these big flamboyant issues, but this is a very modest kind of invisible issue that affects everybody. So it was much easier for us to talk to women about it. And mind you, at that time, we did not have an Urdu word in my language for sexual harassment. We still do not have a word for rape in my language. So it was difficult to use a word, but the minute we would describe it, everybody knew what we were talking about. So mobilizing women was not very difficult around this movement. Mobilizing men was a bit difficult in the beginning, but then we gradually got a lot of men to join us. Our women's movement has taken that turn where we include a lot of our men as part of the struggle because we feel it's a societal issue. Just like in the past decades, the issue of black and discrimination against blacks or other immigrants is a societal issue. It is not just their issue that they need to fight for. Similarly, we feel like women are not the only ones who have to fight for women's issues. It is a societal issue. It's a lopsidedness of power in the whole society. So anyway, we got our men, urban, rural areas. We were very conscious of that this should not be a movement concentrated in urban areas, educated areas. Then we got all the other kinds of stakeholders together. We got academia on board. We got civil society on board, we got labor unions, private sector people, a lot of civil society. We used to use performing arts a lot, theater, songs. We have our own strategies where we use these kinds of, especially folk music, to raise awareness, to bring people together. This is the president of the biggest chamber in Pakistan, in Karachi. We got the chambers involved. It was very interesting with chambers because they would not understand this issue. They do not understand the term women's rights because somehow that has been our term, the activist people, human rights people. So then we had to relearn their language, and we started talking about employees and employers and management relations and work environment and work satisfaction and production levels, etc. And they did understand. And sometimes I relate the joke, which is very interesting. When I used to talk to the managements and we say, this is the scenario we're talking about, you know, where men do this and women. They say, yeah, we have that too. Okay, so how do you resolve it? And they used to say, we fire them both. And we say, okay, let's think of another alternative way, because that might not be a very good strategy. And so we gradually developed a policy, like an anti-sexual harassment policy. And we brought all the stakeholders on board. And the government said, no, we cannot come on board because this word is too vulgar. And we said, listen, don't think of the verb, think of the noun. It's not vulgar. And they said, no, we are not sitting on the table because we are civilized people. We don't talk about these things. And so we then coined a different term, and we called it, rather than anti-sexual harassment policy, we called it the Code of Conduct for Gender Justice. So they said, yes, now we can come on the table with you. So we would use the word harassment, etc. in the policy, but on the titles we use these kinds of words. So I'm just sharing this to tell you that it's like water. You have stones in front of you, and then you just flow around them. So we had to relearn language or coin new language for every stakeholder that we brought on board. Then we got a lot of our stars, our celebrities on board. And it was, in the beginning, they could connect with us because, especially our women, famous women, they experience sexual harassment every day, every hour. And they were able to connect with it. But then they could not believe that in Pakistan we have a movement going on this issue. And so what we used them for was, the way we asked them to help us was that we started an award, like a series. We used to give in a very flamboyant, very big ceremony, we used to give awards to the most gender-friendly companies. So we tried all these non-controversial ways to come to this controversial problem. And we thought, rather than bashing people who have cases, we appreciate people who are doing something about it. So as part of the criteria we had that you should institute an anti-sexual harassment policy, and you should have mechanism for redressal of grievances, etc. So that we would it was a strategy. And then we would have these big ceremonies and invite these stars, and then we would write nice speeches, and these stars would come and say, oh, we are so proud of you. You are the future of Pakistan, and you are the leaders of private sector. So listening to such words from these big stars really had its impact. Then we got the media on board. Our mainstream media, which I don't think civil society has ever been successful in doing that. Our media makes a lot of money. It is a pretty free media Pakistan has. Unlike the surveys of Freedom House, my apologies to those, but they have a category of not free, partially free, and free. And we Pakistanis say that there should be a fourth category, which is called too free. And our media falls into too free media because they just go overboard. They love bashing everybody, whoever comes in front of them. So anyway, bringing them on board was difficult, but we got them emotionally hooked into this. And I think everybody was emotionally hooked into this movement. But it was amazing. At one point, we had so much support that we would just call up, and they would line up whole programs for us. Like if it was a 1-hour show, we would tell them what guests and what topic, and we would just do it as if it was a paid thing. And our movement was not funded. So we were all volunteers. But we got so much resources in terms of people siding with us. Then it was, we started in 2001, and we went through up to 2007. In that time, we got everybody on board. We coined a term in Urdu. We got it established as a genuine Urdu word for it. We got a huge number of people mobilized, and then we introduced this policy, anti-sexual harassment policy, and by 2007, we had about 300 big companies that were already using that policy. So we tested it, we tweaked it, and in 2007, actually the elections were in 2008, when the democratic rule came back to Pakistan, we felt that was the time to now get a legal backing to our policies. So what we wanted was, we wanted a law that says that it is not a voluntary adoption, it is a mandatory adoption of this policy. So everybody should have a sexual harassment policy. So we started our lobbying with our politicians. And here I'm sitting with the law minister, and that woman in yellow clothes is the special advisor to the prime minister on social sector. So we drafted the law. We drafted 2 pieces of legislation. One was an amendment in a mainstream law, and one was a special legislation for countering sexual harassment. So we took it to the government. We wanted to be sure. Now, these are strategic points. I do not know how many of you will become lobbyists, but it's good to know, in case you do decide to, that we were very clear that we wanted it not a private member bill, but a government bill. That means that it should be sponsored by the government and not just by one, like a congressman introducing, but backed by the parties, which was a tougher decision, more difficult to do, because then you have to bring everybody on board on the government side. But it is good in the long run. So we chose that path. And then we also took a decision strategically. ASHA was a very flat organization. We didn't have a president or a chairperson or anything. It was a loosely connected, very flat organization with clear delegation of power. So we wanted it unanimously passed, because that is good for later work. This is also a senator. We're lobbying with all parties. Now, we didn't know anybody in the parliament at that time, okay? So we were just women's rights activists. We came from a background where we do not have those kinds of connections. Our uncles and aunts sitting in Senate, and and we do not, in Pakistan, we still do not have any lobbying firms. So lobbying is something which is homegrown, we just learned by ourselves. So we really started with a little space in a door. Some woman legislator was also an activist in past, and she got us into that door. And that was it. From there on, we made connections with wherever we passed through. We made connections with security guards, with office assistants, with the staff of the parliament, with parliamentarians, whoever came our way. We would say hello, we would befriend them, we would get their cell numbers, we would say, okay, so next time you have this, can you let us know? So we really, it was like a spying agency, getting into the system. And civil society had never really gotten into the parliament. We were always protesting out on the street. But I think this was the first instance where we actually really got into the parliament. And we don't have that kind of information systems like you have, like you can probably call and check when it's in session and what agenda. Now Pakistan is getting onto the web, but at that time, we even had to use connections to find out when the assembly will be in session and what is the agenda, etc. So we had a lot of, I have lots of tales. Should I tell a few just to give them a sense of how we got people in? Because we were an unknown entity, but we kind of created ourselves so big. We created that impression that there was a point when the proper lobbying started and they would not take a decision on our bills without our presence. And we were nobodies really, but we developed that kind of a, not a scare, but as if, we were, you cannot touch our bills. And we would make a lot of fuss about it. But we were very tactful. So we would divide ourselves up, and we would, like in our coalition, the Pashto speakers, like one particular language speakers would go to those parliamentarians so that they could connect better, and we would match up the backgrounds also and send them. And when we go to the bearded ones, we would cover our heads. Now, I had a very hard time doing that, but just so that we could really get everybody on board. And one story I would share with you, which I have shared with other friends also, that one time we were in the law committee when our bill was being discussed. First, they would not put it on the agenda. It's very strange. Just to get it on the agenda is like climbing Mount Everest. So they would not put it on the agenda, and I was harassing their staff a lot to put it on the agenda, and they would not. So one time, I think they got so sick of me, they said, okay, fine, next time we will, just to get me off. And the next time, the meeting, I realized a day before that the meeting was happening, and I said, you promised me, you would have our bill on the next meeting, and how come you're not? And they said, we cannot do anything about it. Only the chair can put it on the agenda. So I said, listen, I will handle the chair. You put it on the agenda. And they said, it's too late. It has been printed. It has gone out. I said, read the agenda to me. So he said, bill so-and-so, legislative business, this business, and then any other item. I said, okay, that is our agenda item. That any other item is our agenda item. And he said, no, you cannot do that. And we said, we will absolutely do that. And we got an okay from the chairperson. It was a woman, actually, so we connected with women a lot better. So the law committee chair was a woman, and we got her okay, and we went there. And we were under the any other item. And we were 3 women, and we were sitting there, and the law committee people were trickling in. And they would look at us, and they would see, they're not parliamentarians. What are they doing in our committee meeting? And so the chair would introduce us, and then another person would enter, and the chair would introduce us. And we got introduced like 12 times every time, because everybody would look at us. And then when the meeting was about to start, they said, okay, while they're here, why don't we start with them? And so they started with us. And we went on and on and on about our bills, and that was the only agenda item discussed that day. So it was like that. We created a lot of space. I also want to tell you a story about one of our senators. He was sort of, he was a senator from a very tribal, thickly tribal area. And about 6 months before that, there was an incident in Pakistan, a very gross violation of human rights. There was an incident where a few women were shot and they were buried. And they were buried when they were still alive because they wanted to marry out of their choice. And this incident, the whole country was in outrage, and in media it was being highlighted. And this particular senator who came from that part of the country, he got up in the Senate and he said, don't you dare fiddle with our traditions, and these are century-old traditions, and you cannot touch them. So everybody bashed him because he sided with that violation so badly. Everybody bashed him so much that he became like a poster person for that bashing. So everybody knew his name because of that. And they would take 2-3 swear words and then take his name because they were just so angry at him. Now, when we were lobbying, there was one point when the religious people got together, even though we had lobbied them, but 3 days before the voting, somehow something happened, and they all got against us. And they said, oh, something good is happening for women? How can we let that happen? So and the tribal people got together with them. So I was really in a bad, I wanted to separate the tribals from the religious so that they don't kind of become a big opposition. So I went to this guy, who was very tribal and had good relations with all the other tribal senators. So I went to him, and he wouldn't see me. And he wouldn't even answer my call because he thought, women's rights activist, she will come and eat me alive. Because he knew how the country was bashing him, and then a women's rights activist, so he wouldn't meet me. But then finally I was able to meet with him, and I was very respectful, and usually in my lobbying I'm very respectful to people. And I was very respectful, and I said, listen, this is what my need is. And you guys have never been fundamentalists. You have other issues with us, yes, but you are not religious fundamentalists. So I want you to lobby with me and separate the tribals from the religious people. And he looked at me, and he was not sure, if there was a trick to it or what. I was a women's rights activist. What was I doing talking to him? So he said, okay. And then he saw that we were very genuine in our lobbying. And actually, he got all the tribals separated from that group, and they all came with us. And the few religious party people were left. And finally, we pumped our progressive parliamentarians, and they sided with us so much at the end that they were on the floor, they were cracking jokes about those religious party people who used to hold the power in the parliament against women. So these things taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about stereotyping. Because when I used to be an activist who was out on the streets and just making fuss and bashing the government, I thought, oh, government is government. And now I rarely use that term because there are so many shades and colors and textures that I can never use the same term for one entity. Parliament as parliament. Oh, these corrupt people, these bad guys, they're against it. And then you find that if you go inside, you find champions that are fighting against those trends within the system. And you need to build alliances with them. And you need to cultivate your champions within that system. And that is where you turn things around. And that was a very, these are very precious lessons that I want to share with you. Just like I started my presentation with Pakistanis are like this. So when we start painting a same color over a big chunk, then that doesn't help, because that is not where the bonding develops, or any allies, or any change starts coming. You have to really explore the textures, and then you realize that there are more committed. Sometimes you find more committed people in the other, which you had stereotyped and shunned, where you can find champions. So anyway, our bills were passed unanimously. Finally, the beards also gave in, and this was our speaker in the last session, Fahmida Mirza, and we had all the working women sitting in the galleries and to tell the parliamentarians that this is our thing and we want all the parties to vote for us. And at the end, when the voting was happening and the speeches, there were so many speeches that the speaker and also the chairman of the Senate, when it came to the Senate, they had a hard time stopping people from making any more speeches because they wouldn't stop. And they would look at the galleries because they wanted them to be, one of those that got up and supported. So they would say, okay, we got the idea, the House is with you, but let's vote. And they would say, no, we want to make our speech because we want to put on record that we were for them. So we got the laws passed. Then the government, now this is also interesting. You can think about your own country, how you do your future work. The government, which was so used to bashing from the civil society, which had never really seen a teamwork. We had the media with us, so we had a nationwide applaud. We had huge appreciation for the parliament. The parliament had never seen that from the citizens. Our civil society had been in that groove. We say in our Pakistani way, we take out our shoe and we bash the government like anything. And that is it. We had never said thank you for anything. So this was a nationwide loud thank you. And the government could not believe that they did something that people are appreciating. And the president said to his party that, this is a very good thing. So let's make a thing out of it. So the president declared that he would invite 100 women of substance from the whole country to the presidency and have them witness the signing. And signing of the laws is not a big deal at all. It is just a bureaucratic process. You never, ever see signing of the law on television. So this was telecasted and was front cover news. And so this is President Zardari of the last term. Now we have a different president and a lot of parliamentarians standing there. So it became a very big deal. And we celebrated women's activists, all kinds of celebrations all throughout the country, rural, urban. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what happened afterwards. So this was accomplished. And we pretty much wrapped up ASHA in 2012. We helped them implement a little bit, and then we wrapped up the movement, which was also, many people were asking questions as to why. I think that the movement should have very specific objectives. They should achieve those objectives, and then they should end. Then we established this mechanism because I think a lot of people have this in their mind, okay, you got the law, then what? We had an implementation mechanism, a committee, a nationwide, it was a very high-powered committee. I was asked to be the chair of that committee by the Prime Minister, and we had 20 members, very high-powered members, to form the mechanism for implementation. So I won't go into the details, but I just want to say that we went through regulatory bodies, banks, regulatory bodies of media. So really institutionalize this legislation. Okay. Then I want to tell you that this episode turned around the civil society and government relations. I think that everybody saw that it can be a win-win. And so the government was very pleased with all this. And so the government said, if you want more things, we can do more things. And so that was really opening up of a window of opportunity. So we were very quick, and whatever was in the pipeline, we thought. And I should also tell you that this really came about after a gap of 50 years. There have been attempts of legislation for women, but very weak. This was the first comprehensive, real people-driven pro-women legislation after 50 years. So this opened the door, and these are our own 2 laws that we got through. Then we got another law passed which criminalized acid attacks, because this was becoming higher. The rate of this crime was getting higher, where men would get angry at a woman and throw acid so that she could never marry again. That it is common in South Asia. Then there was a law that we got through. I don't want to go into the details, but just want to give you an idea how it opened the door for many other things. This was a law we got through for anti-women practices. So we have a lot of these patriarchal, old, archaic practices that still go on. And we wanted to pick them and make them illegal crimes. This was another law for legal aid for women. Then this was a specific law for economic empowerment for women. It started a whole program, welfare kind of a program. This is a commission which is like a watchdog body for Pakistan. I was a member of that too. And we strengthened it. So this was another law. It was a total of 7 laws. If you want, in question and answer session, you can ask me specifically about any particular law. But the point here is that only because we explored a way to make a theme with the parliament and the government, that suddenly doors opened for us. And in 3 years' time, in 50 years, we have 0 hardcore progressive legislation for women. And in 3 years' time, we had 7 laws passed, which was a major breakthrough for us. And just to analyze, I think one was what I have talked about, civil society and government partnership. This was a very genuine kind of media civil society relations. That had never happened before. Our media would never give airspace other than the programs, even in the programs. But our CNN, Pakistani CNN, I remember they did 12 very specific public service messages. They created animations for us. They aired us for 1 month, which involves like huge amount of money. Then our women legislators, I'm very proud of. Pakistan has a lot of women in our parliament, both houses. They cooperate, they coordinate. They're much better than our male parliamentarians. I think all countries should learn from that. They collaborate, and on women's agenda, they come together, which is a very, very good thing. And then they helped us lobby with their male counterparts too. So I give them credit too. Progressive parliamentarians teaming up against the bearded guys. That was a very big thing. Then the bureaucrats also, I will not go into the details, but we have a lot of resistance from our bureaucrats too. I think that's about it. I'll just say at the end that that other than breaking the stereotype, I just wanted to give you a glimpse of how actually we build blocks and bring about change. You know, because generalization is one thing, but looking at the struggle, we may have a lot of issues that we are still struggling against, but one thing, I will maybe mention Malala here a little bit, because a lot of people talked about Malala. I think you are also familiar with Malala. And what I always tell my friends is that please talk about Malala as a product of Pakistan. Here people talked about Malala as if she parachuted from the sky. You know, Malala is a product of Pakistan, and that is how a lot of women in Pakistan are. Because from the time of birth, we walk uphill. You know, so we know how to struggle. And we are very strong in terms of resistance and in terms of struggle. So regardless of the patriarchal weight of the repression and the male domination, we learn how to struggle. So Malala was a daughter of an activist. And we have a lot of activists that get brewed up in their families and in their social setting. And I say Pakistan also is an incubator of a lot of militants. But Pakistan is also an incubator of a lot of people who resist militancy. A lot of people would say that Pakistan, very weak governance, they had militancy, they had military rule 4 times. And I always say that we got rid of our military rule 4 times. It depends on how you want to see it. So you have militancy, but we are the ones who are fighting against militancy. The elections that we have in 2013, militants had declared that we will not allow this election to take place, and we are going to take over and we will turn it into an ummah. We had 55% of people turning up, I would say, in the face of death to vote. And that is a very clear statement. That is a very clear statement that people want elected democracy. They do not want any thugs coming and taking over the country in the name of Islam. So that is what I want to say, that you look at both sides and you look at all the gradations of color in a country to understand that. So with Malala, I would say Malala represents that Pakistan which is resisting and struggling against militancy. And you would see a lot of Malalas in Pakistan. Thank you.
Dr. Saeed would answer questions. Please.
I would like to know, since these laws have been passed, how many cases have been filed in the courts for sexual harassment against women? We know it goes on there forever. Any one of them were decided in the favor, but the grievance is redressed. What happened to those women? Obviously, they have no place, especially coming from the village. They can't survive. You can't even with justice, but they got to live.
After the first year, we had over 1,000 cases. Pardon me? Okay. He's saying the laws for sexual harassment were passed, but what happened after that? Were there women who complained? The numbers that we know, because we were helping out in implementation, over 1,000 cases were resolved in the first year. And they were slow in going to the police and court. So there were about 60 to 70 cases in the courts. And very interestingly, we were thinking in the courts, cases will come related to work, but there were more family type cases. Now, because sexual harassment term has been established very well, and it is like a common word, and people talk about that quite a bit. There are cases now after the 3rd year where people have started finding loopholes and they get safarish, the top guys, and to help them out. But we are at it and it's systematically being implemented. The top companies pretty much have complied with it very firmly. And then it's a mixture. There are some blind spots and there are some sectors that are doing, banking is doing very well, like that.
Father Don's way in the back here, so I'll speak up. You showed the map about the regional differences between the ethnic groups in Pakistan. Has your movement, is it diverse through all of the ethnic groups, and has it crossed the borders that those ethnic groups extend into Afghanistan, Iran, India? Is this kind of for the entire region of that pocket of South Asia, or is this only portions of Pakistan that have been impacted?
Okay. The implementation varies in terms of provinces, because some which are very tribal, they have less implementation, which are more urban, has more implementation. The first law is specifically for working women in formal sector. So more urban areas are affected by that. The second law covers everybody. But there the implementation is relatively slow. So in general, we look after the whole country. So we have created, for example, bodies called implementation watch committees. They are formed under the provincial government. So every province now has an implementation watch committee, and we watch them. So in that way, it's taking its, in terms of regional, it is not through ethnicity that it is spreading. But I mean, I would not say direct influence or not, but we got our laws passed. We were the first ones in South Asia for comprehensive legislation. In 2010, India got theirs passed in 2012. Then Bangladesh, our documents were taken by China and translated into Chinese. Afghanistan started their movement like Asha movement. They were very inspired by us. And their movement was called Muhit Salim. So they got their amendment. They didn't get a full law, but they got their amendment passed a little after us. And Maldives, I have been helping them directly. Maldives was very inspired by our legislation and the movement. So their parliamentary committee sent me their draft legislation. And fingers crossed, I think that it will be passed in July. So it has gone around. And we exchange notes also within the South Asian region.
You said that you don't have a word for rape in your language. Does that fall into the category of sexual harassment, or is there something else you're hoping to do to address rape?
Okay. No, rape is a separate crime in our law also. But in my language, we don't have a word for it. Usually, our languages are very roundabout languages, so we use phrases for things. And anything which the society considered embarrassing, there is always a phrase rather than. So when your wife is pregnant, you don't say my wife is pregnant, you say her feet are swollen, or her lap is about to be filled. Or, you know, if you want to marry your daughter, you say her hands will be painted with henna or something. So it's an indirect way of saying things. So for rape, they used to say a term which we are very much against, which is Izzat Lutjana, which means loss of honor. And that used to be very commonly used, that so-and-so lost her honor. So we really fought against that, and we said this is the most ridiculous phrase you can use for the crime. Then they got a bit defensive, and they started using this new term, which actually means adultery by force, which is also quite ridiculous. So we are in the process of coining a decent term for an indecent crime, which can be direct. So we are in the process of coining something.
I read the book, so I want to know what happened to Tariq Khan. The guy the boss who was the person who was causing all the problem.
You mean the outcome of the case? Then the surprise is gone from reading the book.
Well, let's just say, did you get justice thus?
Okay, that I can answer. I think I did not get justice, that is why the book. I think I carry that weight with me even today. And justice in my mind. And when you read the book, you will know what I mean by that. So that is why my case was filed in 1997, 22nd of December. And then when we concluded the case, then the civil society declared that particular date as the day to mark the struggle against sexual harassment. So 22nd of December, every year for 10 years, civil society used to have programs and things. And then in 2010, our Prime Minister declared that as the official day for working women, the day we filed our case. So in that way, you know, it had, sometimes my husband also asked me, you know, let go. Because fine, you got your bills, you know, you got your book out, you got the case done, but I think that I still carry the weight somehow. I don't think that the UN did justice with us. With 11 women, I don't think that they did justice with us.
Do you think the atmosphere in UNDP has changed?
I hear a lot, especially after the book. I think that the UN has tried to change their system, and now every manager is required to take, right after our case, because our case was marked in their history as the first pure sexual harassment case in UN's history. And first we did not understand what that meant. And then they explained to us that earlier, whenever there was a sexual harassment complaint, it was against an administrative decision. So if a woman was not given a job or if a woman was not given a promotion, she would say it was because of sexual harassment. And then they had to decide whether it was a merit-based or a harassment-based decision. But in our case, all 11 of us, we did not have an administrative decision that we were countering. We were just saying, this is what he does to us and we feel very bad and we want you to stop it. You know, we didn't say that we were losing our job or getting less salary or anything at all. So initially they couldn't figure out how to handle us. They just couldn't figure out. And finally when they did, they declared this case as the first pure sexual harassment case. So there was a task force, there was a new procedure, policy, training courses, etc. But as far as the mindset is concerned, I would say very little progress. The woman who complains is a witch, like we were. That mindset has not, the stigma has not gone away, and unless we take away the stigma, we will never clean up our house.
Can you explain, or would you share, what made you who you are today and your education? I mean, growing up in Pakistan, what part of which province did you come from? What kind of, were you state educated? Were you private educated? What kind of family that, you know, raised someone who would be great?
Question.
And would question.
Okay. I was born in Lahore, which is the Punjab province, the biggest province. But I was brought up in Peshawar. So my schooling and my early university is all from Peshawar, which is the KP, the north, right next to Afghanistan. So I used to, in summer vacation, we used to go to Kabul. And we used to go, wow, like village, you know, kids coming out of a village. Afghanistan was so modern and so, you know, kind of at par with the European countries that we used to get that was our summer vacation. In any case, I think that Peshawar is a very conservative society where I was, it was a small town. And there were several, I would say, restrictions on me. Because I wanted to be in student politics, I wanted to be everywhere, and they were always like, I was negotiating with my parents as to how far I can go. And in the book, I do describe a little bit of my background also. But I think that it comes from questioning. You know, if you are a little girl and you are playing out in the street, and then suddenly one day you say, now you cannot. Or I was playing with boys, and then you say, okay, now you, from this age onwards, you cannot. And you are in sports, and then you say, okay, from today onwards you will not be in sports because you are grown up enough and you cannot bounce around. And the fact that one says, why can I not? That's questioning. And I think my family did have the room to allow questioning. My mother is a very strong woman. My grandmother is a very strong woman. So I think I must have taken some from there. But there are a lot of strong women in Pakistan. I mean, so many people used to ask me about Benazir when I was a student in Minnesota. And they used to say that, oh, Benazir is an exception, and so what if you have woman prime minister, the condition of the women has not changed on the ground. And I say, you know, why do you not acknowledge something good that has happened? You know, why do you always have to put something bad, you know? What if you got this, but you don't have that, you know? And I say, do you want to wait until the time when USA will have a woman head of the state to then acknowledge other countries? If we have a woman head of the state, at least have the courtesy to acknowledge it. And I think South Asia has been very strong in that. India twice, Bangladesh many times now, Sri Lanka twice, Pakistan twice, a woman head of the state. So it has been a thing, and they have huge followings. All those women had huge followings. So if things got changed or not changed, I mean, I think nobody out of those women claimed that they were a women's rights activist, but they were good leaders. So I think that Pakistan is a fertile ground for strong women. Now we're telling our government, if you guys cannot handle with these militants, you know, let us do that. We will handle them.
How typical, when you were in the beginning stages of getting more people to join your cause, how difficult was it to find men who would join the cause? Did they face a lot of social pressures from other men that if they join this cause, then they would kind of be barred from a lot of the social aspects of society?
In some cases, it was not so difficult. In many cases, it was very difficult. And I'll tell you, the easier part was where I was within my own circles. Meaning, in our civil society, in Pakistani civil society, we have a lot of men who are like gems and very clear in their political ideas. So it was easier to lobby with them. And we, in our women's movement also, we do include men. That part was easier. The most difficult part was in these institutions, you know, bureaucracy, the law ministry, and these men in private sector. And because men had, we could just say their words before they would say it. We knew what they would say. You know, women cause it, but you know, look at the low necklines, and then, you know, this is what happened when you wear this kind of. So we knew exactly, and we were like parrots, you know, we would just, with a smile, we would listen to them and answer them and try to explain. But I think that just in terms of very quick tips, I stay away from the jargon a lot. Even though career-wise, I've always been in gender and development career, with the UN or with INGOs. But I stay away from jargon. I never use the word gender in Pakistan. I talk in terms of what is on the ground. So I used to talk to men through their paternal instinct. So I would say, you know, what we are trying to do is to make this, our society, safer for your daughters to work tomorrow. And they understood. If I would have said, you know, women have the right to be in public space too, and women have the right to work too, they would have, you know, slapped me on my head and sent me off. But so the language and the way you approach them, because you are inviting them to become a team. I'm not telling them that they're doing something wrong. I'm saying this is your opportunity. And here I would give you an example of an experience. We went to State Bank of Pakistan, and we said to them, we went to the Vice President of Policy, you know, who doesn't even give people like us appointments, what to talk, you know. And we went to him and we said, listen, what we want your help in implementation of this law. We have gotten this law passed. And he said, listen, I have nothing to do with sexual harassment laws. You know, somebody must have, why did somebody give you an appointment? And we said, you have everything. Now here is a man I'm trying to convince. So I said, you have everything to do with sexual harassment law. He said, no. I said, banks employ a lot of women. And he said, but we only have control or influence on banks on financial policy. I said, you do have a component of policy compliance. And this, because it influences banks, you can put this under policy compliance. And first he was saying, no. And we talked to them for about 45 minutes. And the guy walked us to our car, and he said, anything you want, because we told him that he was sitting in a position. We said, forget about you're a policy, you know, whatever your job. But you are sitting in a position where you have an opportunity to do something for your daughters and the daughters of this country. And we are approaching you as a citizen of Pakistan. And you are sitting in this position where a stroke of pen can make a difference to how this society will be for your daughters. And he said, what do you want me to do? I said, we have these 4 questions. We want you to put it in the audit. He looked at them and he smiled. He said, it's done. So from now on, like in Pakistan, when the State Bank of Pakistan, which is the Papa Bank, they audit all the banks. They also check, do you have a sexual harassment policy? Do you have cases to prove that, yes, it is working? You have a committee, and then there is another, we want them to post the policy up on the wall somewhere so that it's not hidden in the file. So these 4 things are now part of, now we were, rather than us convincing the banks were chasing us, because now this has become part of the audit. You know, and they were saying, now tell us how to do it, tell us how to comply, da, 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 da. And we were distributing materials. So that's, see, we have to, from day one, we were very clear that we have to win the men. Because women are present But we want majority votes for everything, you know, to get our things in the parliament. We got such great champions in our parliament, which we could never dream of sitting outside. You know, when they sided with us, there was a bonding of hearts, because we were approaching them as citizens. And we would always say that you are sitting in a position that you can do something for your children. You know, let's clean out this society. What is this mess around us? And they would side with us.
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about how this was more of a societal problem, and you equated that to things like racism and how that's not just up to the race to deal with. And I guess personally, I've had problems coming up whenever with certain people. You get as a male, I get in the talk of feminism, and I'm immediately shut down because I'm a male. And while I certainly understand those reactions, I guess my two questions are: one, did you ever come up with that with people within your own movement that said, no, we shouldn't try to incorporate the men, they've had their time, that's history. And how did you go about that, and what are, I guess, possible solutions that I could go about that in the future?
I think excellent question, because these are the subtleties you have to deal with when you are bringing about change. When I was a student here at the University of Minnesota, I was very engaged with the women's movement here too, in USA. And that was like a long time ago. And what I learned was, that was one of my lessons that I learned from here, that women's movement here really left out men and became very anti-men. And I saw that danger in Pakistan also as we were going ahead. And so in a sense, my lesson learned was very useful for me, so that we don't let our women's movement go polarize in that way. And there is a small component in our women's movement who is very anti-men too. But I belong to that faction which is always propagating that actually men and women going against each other would really be lose-lose situation. If we come together and we realize, because for us it is socialization, for men it is socialization. And the thing is to unravel the socialization, the patriarchal socialization. And men need to go through there too. If I was a man, I can tell you that I would be leading a men's movement, men's movement. Because men have not come to that level where, at least I can say safely for Pakistan, I cannot say it from here. But men need to come together and deal with their issues also. You know, there are many ways where men are suppressed or are, I would say, result without their choice, a result of their system socializing them. You know, all this anger and this violence and this, the violence in the world, I would say, you know, and the masculine face of it. I think that men collectively have not acknowledged and gone against that. You know, why turn men into wild beasts? You know, the society turns that. The society lets them focus on their anger more than their affections. So at some point, I think that men should stop and say, hey, what are you guys turning us into? You know, give us more room for our compassion and our nicer parts. In our families, there are many times mothers scare children from their fathers and say, you wait till your father gets home, then I'll tell him. And you know, why should men be a beating stick and something to be scared of? It's nice to see the change in parenting patterns where fathers are becoming more compassionate, but still there is a room to. So I think that men and women working together and questioning the socialization and these strange roles that have been given to them, even though we've countered some bit, but so I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
You mentioned that in Pakistan, the parliament system had multiple parties and they were able to like reach out to each of them. And do you see a possibility for that to happen in America, even though we have two parties and there's a lot of
Just
polarization? Just really two, but there's a lot of polarization that happens. And you think
A lot, yes. Yes.
having a point of contention for two parties to attack each other on
Yeah.
women's issues?
No, we have 14 in our parliament. Yeah, we have 3 big ones, and then we have like about 4 or 5 good medium ones, and then we have small ones which are also pretty vocal. That is a democracy. Sometimes I joke with my American friends that you go against one party system, but then what do you have? Two party system. Hey, you have some 4, 5, 6 parties. It's a big country, but I think that more parties. My personal opinion is that more parties is at least 3, 4 parties is good for democracy. Otherwise, you start losing the difference between one party and the other, because within the party, the left and right become so big within one party that you can actually lose the distinction between the two parties. So that shows that people are very limited and they cannot go elsewhere. So in general, I would just make that comment that it would be nice to see more parties in such a big country. It'll be good inspiration for us. But polarization is something I think that needs to be dealt with in terms of the people also. I think the whole society is getting polarized, at least as an observer, I see that.
So it's easy for Americans to look at other countries and say, well, it's way worse there, we have it so good here. But kind of piggybacking on the outsider view, are there movements right now that women and, well, a society should be focused on as far as women's rights in the US that maybe that you've seen has some momentum, or things that need to be addressed that we're not focusing on, or we're not seeing?
Okay, now again I would say as an outsider. These days I'm not too hooked in women's movement here, because these days I'm a democracy tourist. So I'm exploring DC and I'm exploring democracy, but I think that the gaps that I see as an outsider, one, this polarization with men. Second is to go to an extreme where you lose the majority people as your supporters. Third, I think that homosexuality and women's issues have blended in, and I think that these should be separate movements, linked, yes, but I think that homosexuality should be men and women both together movement. Women's rights issues are slightly separate, just like the anti-racial movements were separate, and now the immigrant movements. Here it is so much blended that it is very difficult for me as an outsider to make a distinction between them. So sometimes I feel like if we have not started in Pakistan on the homosexuality struggle, I would say we have not. I mean, there are very little things. It's almost like, in the women's movement, I'm made to feel guilty that I'm not a legitimate women's rights activist, So it's blended so much. Does that answer? I mean, 3 things I've mentioned.
Well, yeah, I was looking at maybe particular issues that you've noticed that we haven't taken on. You didn't mention about we haven't had a lot of women political leaders.
Yeah.
We just had Gina Davis on campus, who was about gender and media, and she talked about how we're 90th in the world for women legislators, for example, would be one issue that
One thing.
doesn't have much traction.
Yeah. One thing that has amazed me, and I do not want to offend anybody, because we have a lot of problems, so I do not want to be the one pointing out problems here, but one thing that has just amazed me over the last 2 decades of my visits coming back and forth to USA is that there is such a blind spot on patriarchy. It's like a total blind spot. And women's movement is one case, but women in general, they have like 100% blind spot. And so organizing and fighting for a cause doesn't feature because everybody is already at the ultimate, they have achieved it. And everybody is so thankful that they have achieved it. So it just leaves me speechless. I mean, we are, we have patriarchy in our faces, so we go punch, But when patriarchy is glossed over and under the table, I won't say under the carpet, but under the table, and is brewing everywhere, and to us it's very visible, but it's totally invisible, then that astonishes me.
We could go on and on, but we must stop. But thank you so much again for a wonderful presentation and stimulating conversation. And she will be here if you want to continue some private chat with her. But let's join in thanking. And do get her book. It's an amazing read, please. It's really amazing. So.